Welcome back. In the last week, we've taken time and we've dissected the Liberal Party's platform with respect to housing, as well as the Conservative and the NDP platforms. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss the 7 worst ideas in those plans. We're going to talk about why they're there, why you shouldn't be tricked by them, and what they might mean to you down the road if they are enacted. But before we get into it, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers, where one lucky subscriber is going to win $5,000 to put towards maybe their down payment or paying off their mortgage or put towards their saving. Who knows? It's up to the winner, but in order to win, you have to be subscribed. It's free, it's easy, and it's definitely worth it. So go ahead and click that subscribe button. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit, product, penalty, price, in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's discuss the 7 worst election promises made in this election campaign with respect to housing. And the first thing I need to discuss with respect to this whole conversation is you always have to keep in mind how and why certain incentives are causing people to do certain things. And in politics, the incentives for politicians are to do things that would cause people to vote for them. And in a lot of ways, that means targeting certain aspects, certain pieces of the economy that people are upset about, and targeting those with respect to election promises. But the promises that they make with respect to those issues can have the opposite effect of what people think they will actually have. And we're going to discuss that a little bit in this video, especially when we get to the foreign ownership conversation and the real estate investment conversation, because some of the suggestions coming out of the parties would have a very adverse effect on the economy and the overall housing market. In fact, it would have the opposite effect of what people might think it would have if those policy suggestions actually get enacted. So let's go ahead, let's jump right into it here. And I'm going to first and foremost talk about the rent-to-own programs. So the Liberals have suggested that they're going to make it easier for renters to become homeowners. And they're going to do so by creating what's called a rent-to-own program, where they're going to ask investors to take slightly lower rents so that people can save for a down payment and within a 5-year term, take over properties and basically buy them from the landlords. And there's a few reasons why this won't work. First of all, finding investors who are going to take less money in order to sell a property to somebody is going to be hard to do, because investors want the incentivization of making money. And by asking them to do it for cheaper, that's going to make it harder to find investors who are actually willing to do that. And they may put their money in other places, other markets, maybe the stock market, maybe other things, maybe businesses, but they aren't going to be inclined to want to invest in real estate if they're being asked to rent it out for less than what market rents are. The second problem is that rent-to-owns, as a general rule, are designed to make it so that the consumer or the borrower never is actually able to realize. They're used for people who haven't already saved their down payment or don't have the credit to find themselves in a situation where they can hopefully achieve that dream of home ownership. But after a 5-year period, very rarely do they ever have the improved credit or the increased down payment to actually realize on the properties. And this is a deceitful trick that real estate investors have used for years. I've had other videos on this topic where I talk about why you don't want to be in a rent-to-own situation. They're just a bad thing, and they're used to get people to pay higher rents and ultimately never actually be able to take over control of a property. So this is just something that, as a buzzword, rent-to-own sounds like a good idea. Somebody in the government said, hey, that sounds like a good idea, let's make it part of our policy, without actually realizing that rent-to-owns are not a good thing in 99% of cases. And I don't know if it's 99% of cases, but it is in a large majority of cases, that is for sure. So this is a poor promise put forward by the Liberals, and I sincerely hope that this one never gets enacted. Now, number 2, reducing CMHC premiums. Okay, so last year there was this huge conversation, especially when Evan Siddall was running CMHC, and it was all about protecting the insurance companies. So in the event that there ever was some sort of a housing collapse, they would have the ability to maintain housing in Canada and basically ensure that if a worst case scenario happened, it wasn't catastrophic to the real estate industry and housing in Canada. Now we've got the Liberal government suggesting that they're going to ask CMHC and the other 2 insurers to reduce premiums by 25%. That just wouldn't be prudent, because these premiums are set based on the expectation of how much the insurance company would have to pay out if there was some sort of catastrophic event. And you've seen in the past CMHC talk about stress testing the market, talking about 19, 20, 30 40% decreases in the housing market and whether or not they'd be able to withstand it. Well, I can tell you if you reduced insurance premiums by 25%, CMHC would definitely not be able to withstand whatever happened catastrophically in the economy. So this is a bad idea, and this one is purely designed to make people go, oh, hey, I'm going to have to pay less for that insurance premium. Maybe it's $7,500 instead of $10,000. So that's a good thing. Yay, liberals. But in reality, what it's doing is it's putting the entire housing market at risk down the road. So this is a really bad idea. Number 3 is banning foreign ownership. This is being put forward by both the Liberals and Conservatives, as well as the NDP. This is something that would have negative consequences down the road. And everybody thinks, oh, Vancouver's housing market has been run up by foreign buyers. The reality of it is that foreign buyers were a drop in the bucket. They were a very small percentage of that run up in prices, and they don't have a big enough impact to control the market. But what banning them from buying in Canada would do is it would create a scenario where less foreign money is coming into the economy, and therefore that would have a negative effect on the economy. It would actually hurt the housing market. So there's a lot of unintended consequences that would come along with something like this. I certainly can't get behind banning foreign ownership. I do like that the Conservatives have talked about encouraging foreign ownership in rental properties or purpose-built rental properties. That to me is a great idea. But with respect to banning foreign ownership completely for a period of 1, 2, 3 years, just taking that extra money that's coming into the economy is not a good idea in my mind. It's like a business saying, well, you know what? We've got all this money that's coming in. We're going to stop taking a portion of the money from this sector of the people that are bringing money into our business because we think it might help the other sectors. And businesses just don't act in that way. And economies and countries shouldn't act in that way either. Number 4, another one from the Liberals, more taxes on investors. Now, they have 2 talking points with respect to this. First is with short-term investors and flippers, and the second is with real estate investment trusts. And you have to be really careful when you have people who invest in an economy, people who provide housing, people who provide rental properties, taxing them more and saying, hey, you're making too much money, disincentivizes them, and it actually would have a negative effect on supply, and a negative effect on supply would ultimately lead to higher prices, having the opposite effect of what's intended. Because what the Liberals are thinking here is, hey, we have this opportunity to tax them more and make it so that they aren't making as much money, and that will stop them from investing and stop housing prices from increasing. And the reality of it is they'll just hold on to the properties they have and make it harder for people to buy properties, where you'll ultimately end up with a situation where you'll see housing prices increase as a result of a policy like this. So again, as an economist, when we look at things like this, we go, what's the intended consequence and what's the likely thing to actually happen? And quite often, more often than not, it is the opposite effect that you're trying to create that happens when you create economic policies like this one. Number 5, promoting 7 to 10-year mortgages. This is up from the Conservatives. This one's just generally a bad idea. Back in 2010, we had a whole bunch of clients who said, hey, we want 10-year mortgages. They paid 1.5% higher because they had certainty that interest rates were going to go up. And 5 years later, guess what? Interest rates hadn't gone up enough for it to make sense. We refinanced them all into lower rate variable mortgages. They all chose variable rate mortgages. So think about this. They went from 10-year fixed being ultra conservative to losing so much money on those 10-year fixed over the first 5 years that they switched to variable rates because they realized that they made that big of a mistake. And longer term mortgages are at a higher price. You pay 1.5% to 2% higher for a 7 to 10-year mortgage. And on a $500,000 mortgage, that's ultimately, $35,000, $40,000, $50,000 that you're paying extra over a 5-year period. And ultimately what that means is that the bank's making more money, not necessarily the consumer. So we always recommend shorter term mortgages. And there's all this certainty around the fact that interest rates are going to go up. There was the same certainty back in 2010. Interest rates didn't go up substantially, quite frankly, because they couldn't. And you're going to see at least 5 to 10 years before interest rates go up substantially again, just because when interest rates get this low, the sensitivity to increase interest rates go up. And as a result, it becomes harder to increase interest rates and get yourself out of that low interest rate hole. So this is something that I can't recommend. I would much rather recommend that somebody saves that $35,000 and has a $35,000 lower mortgage at the end of 5 years and ultimately rides the wave of fluctuating interest rate than locking into a long-term interest rate that has significantly higher costs associated with it, but with an added sense of security, which you probably don't need. Number 6, and this one's out of the conservatives as well, is changes to the stress test. They have suggested, and I don't know what the suggestion is here from the perspective of the relevance, but they've suggested that small business owners and people who are on commission are at a disadvantage because of the stress test. I don't know why they think that if something that everybody has to qualify for equally across the board is disadvantageous to this certain group of people, but I can't in good conscience recommend that they give any sort of advantages to people who are in an industry or in industries or employment types that have variable rates of income over and above normal consumers who have normal jobs and normal incomes. This just doesn't make any sense to me. This is just kowtowing to small business owners and people who are on variable incomes. Bad idea. Vote buying for sure. I don't like that one either. And number 7, and this is the last and probably the worst idea out of all 7 of these. This is out of the NDP, and this is the suggestion that they're going to go back to 30-year amortizations. So when we look at these policies, when we look at things and we go, okay, what are we trying to do here? Well, the NDP is probably thinking 30-year amortizations, we're going to make payments lower. Well, guess what happens when you make payments lower? We learned this lesson over the last 18 months. Apparently, the NDP didn't learn this lesson, but we learned this lesson is when interest rates went down and payments got lower, people bought more houses and bigger houses, and as a result, housing prices went up. If you put in 30-year amortizations once again, you would find yourself, Canadians would find themselves in a situation where housing prices would be increasing, and that would be a bad thing for the economy and have the absolute opposite effect of what the NDP is suggesting. What it would do is it would cause people to have the same payments, but substantially more debt. It wouldn't decrease housing prices or make houses more affordable. So those are the 7 worst ideas I've seen out of the 3 parties. They are all equally as bad as the others. I don't think there's any good ones in there. I don't think there's any argument to be made for any of these. If you have ideas on what you think are bad ideas that the federal government has put out or that the other parties have put out, leave them in the comments section below. If you found this video useful, and I hope you did, and I hope it gives you a little bit of thought with respect to how to vote and what the party promises are and what the actual effects would have, then go ahead, click that subscribe button, click that like button, click that notification bell, and we'll see you on the very next video. Cheers.